Good morning. Is this working? Thank you. Carl and I are happy to be with you this morning. It's the last Sunday before Janet returns to the pulpit, and that's our main announcement this morning. She'll be back. Her garden is also going to be open for a garden tour next Saturday. I think it's from 2 to 4. I'm not clear, but I have a feeling that it's around 2 to 4. So that'll be wonderful also to see her gardens. And then next Friday is another concert on the green, thanks to the Gloucester Meeting House Green, and the group is called What Time Is It, Mr. Fox? So it's going to be a little different from the usual. Welcome to the Gloucester UU Church, the oldest UU church in the country. If it's your first visit today, I'm looking around. I'm not sure. Anyone here for the first time? No. Okay, well, I know there's someone who's been here the third time. But anyway, for all of you who are here and who come regularly, huge hello. And if I don't know you, please come up and talk to me afterwards, because I'm an old lady. Okay. My easy excuse, right? If you're on a Zoom screen today, welcome, and thanks so much to our text man, Owen Casey, for making this possible for people to come from away. And do have a candle and a match nearby, as well as your coffee or tea, to enjoy our service.
I'm Carl Frank, a lay member of this congregation, filling in during the sabbatical leave of our regular minister, Janet Parsons. Let us put aside our usual concerns and enter into a spirit of worship together. Our first reading is a famous paragraph from the Pensées of Blaise Pascal. In your order of service, I have only put in the French most famous line, which was occasioned by a sense of dysphoria, unease, malaise that was caused probably by the scientific revolution and the Protestant Reformation, both of which occurred in the century of Pascal's life. And Pascal reacted by retiring from his profession as a mathematician, joining a small group of devoted Christians, Catholics, and devoting his intellectual time to writing the most compendious proof of the truth of Catholic Christianity that anyone has ever penned. It never convinced me, but it helped him overcome his dysphoria. The line that I put into the order of service comes from this paragraph. When I consider the short duration of my life, swallowed up in an eternity before and after the little space I fill, engulfed in the infinite immensity of spaces, which, by the way, had just been revealed in visual form by Galileo's improvement of the telescope. That's not Pascal speaking, that's my observation. I feel engulfed in the infinite immensity of spaces whereof I know nothing, and which know nothing of me. I am terrified. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. I'll give it a try in French. Le silence éternel de ces espaces infinis m'effraie. Our opening hymn is Blue Boat Home, which gives us a different picture of ourselves floating in the immensity of the universe, and which was inspired by that wonderful photograph that was taken on the Apollo 8 mission, the so-called Earthrise photograph, which shows the blue-green Earth with the white clouds rising over the horizon of the moon. And so, Blue Boat Home.
I feel no motion.
In the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we enter into worship with the kindling of our chalice. The chalice represents the embrace of our community, and the flame represents our search for meaning, justice, and love. We now affirm the covenant we share with one another. The words are in the order of service, if you care to join in. Sally, proceed with the lighting of the chalice as we say the unison affirmation. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In recent weeks, we began the practice as a reminder to ourselves and our fellow passengers on Mother Earth who live amidst conditions of war, and those who, perhaps unwillingly, continue to wage war. We continue this practice, uncertain when, if ever, it would be appropriate to stop. This practice began in reaction specifically to the Russian invasion of its neighbor, the Ukraine. We raised a Ukrainian flag over our church entrance then, and it is still there. We do recognize that Ukraine is not the only place where people are waging war. It's time for just a moment. We do this to prove to you that we're amateurs.
Green light's on, this is all good, and I'm talking to you about green frog today, which is a practice of mine. Has been for about 20 years. And I learned it from a book by a woman, her last name is Curtis, and she wrote Depression is a Choice. And when I saw it in the public library in Portland, Maine, I picked it up because my mom was seriously depressed when I was a kid. And my sister, my older sister Mary, shot and killed herself when she was 50 because she couldn't handle her bipolar disorder. She loved the highs, hated meds, but she couldn't handle one more low. So here I read the book, and I also want to share about my own sad thoughts, that when I was sad, I thought my sadness was my deepest feeling. It seemed bigger than anything else. Laughter went by so fast, I didn't notice it, but my sadness seemed to go way down to here. So I read the book, and she says something so brilliant that it helped me, still helps me. And that was that our thoughts are in our left hemisphere of the brain, which is at a certain distance from the right hemisphere of the brain. And in the right hemisphere, there is humor, among other things. This is not a lecture on the brain, okay? This is... So what she said she did to shift from the left side of her brain, where her sad thoughts were, to her right, was say something silly. And what she said was green frog. Now, I thought, okay, I'm getting chills in my legs just saying that much. So I said, okay, I think I'll give that a shot the next time I'm feeling low. So that the next time I felt low, I thought to myself, okay, this is the time, Sally. So I said, green frog. And even thinking green, I started smiling. And that low feeling vanished. And I could not believe that something I had thought was my base was easily tossed off with a word. So that's why I'm sharing it with you. If you remember Green Frog. So I had a friend recently, a new friend, and she came over to the house and she was really having a hard time divorce. And so I gave her the green frog that sits in my garden, little green frog, and told her this story. And she went home, and a few days later she brought a statue of 7 green frogs sitting on top of each other. And Carl and I, and hopefully Victoria, will be painting that, because we're going to have you visit our garden last Sunday in August, and maybe it'll be painted by then, or maybe it won't, but there's my green frog for you. Thank you.
The unison prayer for this morning is printed in your order of service, I hope. Right? Okay. It is by Chris Cervantes. Rest now. Look up at the stars and down at the grass.
Imagine the stars looking back at you over the years and centuries, constellations of the empty space.
Imagine the feel of the grass on your bare feet. Rest in the peace of this moment.
Be still.
At the turning axis of the world, and let go.
Of the long unschooling of history, of sorrow and joy and birth and death. Rest now in the peace of this moment.
We will now take a few moments for a silent meditation, after which Susan will begin a musical piece devoted to the meditation.
A couple of weeks ago, I was on my way to my yoga class at the Annisquam Library. And as I approached, there was a woman weeding the pebbled path at the edge of the street. And I stopped and said hi and told her that I had a formula for getting rid of weeds with vinegar. And she said, I like to weed by hand. So I moved on. And then I noticed down this pebbled path by one of the beautiful old brick buildings, some weeds growing at the edge of the pebbles and against the brick building. And they were beautiful, just waves of these weeds, maybe about that high. And I was struck by their beauty. And when I came out, after the yoga class, I looked again and sort of imprinted them on my memory. Then I come home, and there I am with my vinegar substance and all my great plans, big bottle of vinegar, and I didn't have any desire to use it. So then I waited a while, and when this past week I thought, Sally, you've been digging weeds out of your flower garden, bags and bags of weeds. Is this really the thing to do with weeds? And do I really want to kill all the weeds with my vinegar substance? And so I stayed with that for a couple days until the answer came, and it was, go for it, Sally. You've got this garden that you love. You love the arrangement of the flowers you've chosen and how they look, and they're like your little art project in the yard. That doesn't mean that it's more beautiful than those weeds that you saw by the brick building in Annisquam. So I allow myself this flower garden, and I love the weeds that I saw just as much as my own flower garden. So thanks.
Each week we gather in this sanctuary to sustain and be sustained by our community to share, explore, celebrate, and sometimes mourn together. We carry the work of the Church beyond these walls as one of 1,000 Unitarian Universalist congregations, each entirely self-supporting in a financial sense, while supporting one another in our shared principles of love and community. To support this Church and all of its works, this morning's offering will be gratefully received. Blessings upon the givers and upon their gifts. The next reading is from the Associated Press. As they reported it, the Sunshine Preservation Act, which unanimously passed the Senate on March 15th of this year, would nationally shift clocks an hour later to maximize daylight. Some doctors have argued that adopting permanent standard time would be a healthier option and better align with human and terrestrial rhythms. It was noted by the senators that it was hoped that people would have more time for shopping and more productive work at the assembly line if there were, if we shifted permanently to so-called daylight time. Unless the House of Representatives votes this down, high noon will be history. 12 o'clock was meant to be the time when the sun was overhead. It will then be equivalent of 11 o'clock now. Such a law was passed previously in December 1973, and it met with such widespread opposition that it was repealed 10 months later. So now they're going to give it another try. I'm going to go up to the pulpit to give me the courage to read a sermon for you. Being at home in the world. This title came to me after I read a book, The Disappearance of Ritual. The author is Byung-Chul Han, born in South Korea, now the head of a university in Berlin, Germany. His book is as unusual and, I think, as admirable as his personal achievement in becoming the first Asian-born person to become the chair of philosophy at a German university. He took his doctorate, by the way, at the University of Freiburg in Breisgau, where I myself studied once. As I write this, I hear from across the harbor, and I'm not making this up, I really was hearing it, a bugle playing Retreat. I recognized it from the summer, a half a century ago, when I worked at a summer camp, where the day was decorated with recorded bugle calls issuing from a loudspeaker by the flagpole. This particular bugle call, I recalled, meant, in that context, go back to your cabin. The next bugle call in the daily cycle would, of course, be taps. Most everyone is familiar with taps. It's the bugle call played at military funerals. But in the everyday cycle of life at Camp Delaware, it meant go to bed. So that you can see where I'm going with this, I am not now outlining Professor Hahn's book. I'm introducing his topic by reminding us all of the cultural history in which he positions his book. Our shared context of that history he takes for granted and does not explain it. His title is The Disappearance of Ritual. He does not mean by ritual anything like the steps for celebrating communion or marriage, but he takes it for granted that the concept of ritual can be stretched to include in itself all the performances that give significance to culturally meaningful times and meetings. For example, even tax day in the U.S. now is special, not because it is April 14th, but because of all the activities which must be completed by then. The deadline of getting something to the mailbox by midnight. It is a ritual in the sense of Professor Hahn's book. He expects the reader to know that as part of the meaning of what he's talking about. This, for example, that in the centuries before everyone had a wristwatch or cell phone, and in the time before private homes had pendulum clocks, city dwellers had bells in towers to signal the occurrence of religious services. The bells could also announce the unpredictable public emergencies, fires, war. Time to the people of those centuries was marked not by numbers on a clock or days on a calendar, but by meaningful events, ceremonies with associated rituals. These gave human life a structure in time, just as places give an emotionally important structure to space. For example, as Gloucester is a place with a name and a character, it is not just a set of numbers to designate a spot in the infinite space which constitutes the universe. Gloucester as a place has a meaning to us. It is not equivalent to so many degrees north latitude and then the degrees of longitude west of Greenwich. In the days before time was ruled by wristwatches, there was going to church on Sunday, for them as could, to mark the week, and Christmas or Midsummer Eve and the like. The reason this church, the one we meet in now, survived the COVID years as well as it did is that for our congregation, Sunday services made the otherwise featureless time of quarantine into a structure in which we could feel at home. Professor Hahn's first point, and now I'm sort of getting to his point rather than telling you about ritual. Professor Hahn's first point, a point that takes all of the above for granted, is this, and here for the first time I quote his own words, as translated by Daniel Stoyer. Rituals are symbolic techniques created by us as techniques for making ourselves at home in the world. Rituals are to time what home is to space. They render time habitable as home renders space habitable. They structure time, they furnish it and make it accessible. And they enable communication through which we can create community. Professor Hahn writes in the preface to his book, "The present essay is not animated by a desire to return to ritual. Rather, rituals serve as a background against which our present times can be seen to stand out more clearly. I, however, see this book as a guide for an intentional return to ritual, showing us how we might steer the direction of our lives and our culture by thoughtfully choosing to come together to give ourselves meaning." Now we get to the quote from the Associated Press. "American senators of both parties seem to have forgotten what AM and PM means, before and after, ante and post, the meridian being the place on the earth where we stand, and the same place in the heavens above us, where the sun will be overhead as experienced by a human person standing upright. The idea of 12 o'clock a.m. and p.m. is based upon that human experience and not upon simply the numbers that are being pointed to by your wristwatch. The Senate seems to have no regard for high noon. They think they are creating more light by moving the hands of their watches from 11 to 12. In the workday today, some workers get interrupted after dinner by urgent text messages about some new thing that needs doing before the next workday begins. The current in the next workday? How do you tell the difference? When I moved to rural Vermont from suburban New Jersey, I discovered there was a special time every summer called Old Home Week. Ham and bean dinners were staged in church basements, and the younger generation who had moved to the cities came back for them. The house they assembled at, their homes, was known as, quote, the old home place. People in that time and place had homes in both time and space, and Old Home Week was a combination of a designation of a place and a time. Homemaking is how we make space habitable. I'm not recommending that we revive rural America's Old Home Week, but that we thoughtfully nurture meaningful events inspired by Byung-Chul Han's insights into how ceremonial events render time habitable by human beings. Return now to Pascal and what pushed him into a sense of homelessness within the universe as the science of his time portrayed it. Our first reading, Le Silence Éternel and so on, has stuck with me for some 60 years as an expression of being lost in a world that made no sense, to Pascal and also to my friend Sudi. Sudi was a friend who loved that French sentence and repeated it. It was his trademark idea. He repeated it for 2 years of his life before he dropped out of college. And after finding himself, even getting married and curing his dysphoria, he returned and graduated. The despair of the man who originally wrote my friend's motto, Blaise Pascal, his despair was brought on by the revelations of newly invented telescopes and mathematics, which, in the hands of the astronomers Kepler and Galileo, proved to Pascal's satisfaction that the Earth was not the center of our universe, that we lived on a wandering planet, just one among many, going around the sun, which itself is not special in any way among thousands of stars, billions of galaxies. Pascal addressed his dysphoria, the opposite of euphoria, a general malaise, by writing an exhaustive proof of the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. I hope he felt better for it. In any case, I commend him for taking it in his own hands to address his dysphoria as best he could by writing his thoughts and joining a religious community. This is not what I'm recommending to us, but I am recommending it to us to consider the fact that we can address our current dysphoria using what Byung-Chul Han's insights as guides for personal action. Thank you. Closing hymn. Our closing hymn is stated in your order of service as to be sung only the second and the third verses. We tried ahead of time and discovered that the first verse is really quite lovely, despite the fact that it's got some German in it. And and in honor of Professor Hahn's German professorship, I thought maybe we should put it back. So we are going to next sing together, with Susan accompanying us on the organ, Die Gedanken sind frei, which means in English, thoughts are free. And it's in the spirit of our being free to live our lives and observe the rituals that we choose that I chose this as part of the service this morning. So Sally and I will try to sing it together along with everybody else.
We'll sing it.
We will, not just
Sing it,
try.
yeah.
Okay. So, Susan, it is number 291
Thank
in the gray. Please be seated. Our benediction today is by Eric Williams. Blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey. May you go forth in peace. And now Sally and I invite you to hold up your candle at home, if you have one, and together we will blow them out as we say the words to extinguish our chalice. The words, if you do not know them, are printed in the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our worship has ended. Our service begins anew. Go in peace and return in love. Amen.